This is a little bit of a confined space, of course, so it's a little difficult for me to hold the camera and loosen these fasteners. So I'll try to show you what I've done here and after I've done it. So the first thing I did was, if you can see the mark on the end of the rotor, and I've marked the rotor and ignition cam so I can put them back in the same place. There is a notch in the cam. You can maybe see it right beside the red mark. So that's the way to make sure the cam is in the right place. But it's going to be a little bit hard for me to see that as I put it back in, and it's a little bit hard to see even with this mirror. Now if the engine was out, it'd be no problem, but the way we're working today, I decided to put the red mark on there. So now I've got to take those two screws that we can see holding the rotor in place out. So I have a screwdriver bit here for my quarter-inch ratchet, an adapter, and if I've got the ratchet turned the right way, I'm just going to reach down in here using the ratchet, trying to show you and see what I'm doing here. It's a bit of a challenge, but anyway, I'm going to use the ratchet to take these screws out, and let's see, there's enough clearance in here to get the ratchet in and on the screws, but if I wasn't holding the camera I'd be able to see what I'm doing. But anyway, the screws are actually loose, so I'm going to take them out, and there should be a lock washer on there if the camera will focus. So there's a lock washer on there, so I'm going to carefully place these out here after I make sure I don't lose the lock washer. And then the cam comes off. Now I've actually cheated and I've taken this cam off of here already. I had to get in here and tap it with a hammer handle and tap it one way and then rotate the crankshaft and tap it another and work it around until it came off. So now I'm going to use a strap wrench around the rotor. And even though these are British standard fasteners, a 13/16 socket fits the nut on here. My mirror here, and I can show you where the nut is. You can see the nut in there. So I'm going to use the strap wrench to hold the rotor and put the ratchet on here and take this nut out. So I need 3 hands at the moment, so I'm going to hold the rotor with the strap wrench with one hand and turn the ratchet with the other and take this nut out of here. So using the strap wrench and the ratchet, I was able to get the nut to loosen. So there, the nut is out. So now we thread in the Zebra rotor remover tool, just backing the screw out here in the center. And that, just see if that threads in there. Oh, it is, okay. It's gone in a bit. So now tighten this in until it contacts it. And now I'll need a wrench on here and a wrench on here, and I can't hold the camera in 2 wrenches, so. And it sounds like the weekend has started early. The parade of motorcycles constantly by my house has started. So I'm going to set the camera down and see if I can break this free and get the rotor to start to come off with the wrenches, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I did manage to break the rotor free. It started to come off of the crankshaft. So if you watch here, as I turn this with my fingers, you can see the rotor moving out of the case. Actually coming quite nicely. Oh, and there we can see the edge of the rotor and the start of the windings there. And it's getting loose there, so I'm going to take the rotor back out of this, puller back out of it. So I think that's going to be in the way. And then see if the rotor will come out. There we go. Carefully, try not to drop it. Let it clear there. And have a look inside here. The commutator actually doesn't look terrible. There's obviously rust on the pole pieces. And there's rust around the outside. Let's see. Yes, and we can see where this was the downside when it was sitting stuck. Yeah, there's the stain on it. Okay, so we're going to have to do some cleaning on that. And if we look in here, there's rust on the stator, and we can see a couple of the brushes there. That brush moves. That brush doesn't move. Oh, the rotor's trying to slide away here, so we better set that down before it falls. Okay, so that brush moves. That brush, I'm hitting it with my finger and it's not moving. Brush down here, it's not moving. And this one's not moving. So what I'm going to do is take some compressed air and gently blow some of this dust out of here. And then I'm going to spray these, all of these brushes with some penetrating oil and work them and see if they will loosen up. Okay, a little progress report here. So this is the brush that was moving. So I sprayed it, of course, after I got in here with the compressed air line and let some of the dust out of here. And this brush was moving, so I did spray it with some penetrating oil, and it's still moving. And this brush here, the one that was in this holder, I have sprayed it with some penetrating oil and moved it, and actually got it somewhat freed up and pulled it out to check the spring. There's a spring on the base of it here. And what can happen when this gets rusty is that spring can get weak and actually break, so then it doesn't have the force to push the spring out against the rotor. So I'm just going to, I took it out and I cleaned it a little bit just with my fingers. And I'll try to put this back in here and see if it's going to, see, it's still sticking. If the camera will focus here, please. The brush isn't stuck. Well, it's stuck there now, but it will move. So I'm going to work this a little bit more with some penetrating oil and get it so, try to get it so that it doesn't stick at all. It should actually come out a little further, I think, with the spring. It's not consistent. Okay, so I'm going to work this a little bit more, and the other brushes, where are we here? There's another brush down in here in the darkness that pushed in and stuck, and another one down in here that pushed in and stuck, so I'm going to have to work with them. So I'm going to carefully work them. And these brushes are made from I believe they say it's a carbon brush, so they are fairly soft and brittle. They can break and chip easy, and these wires aren't all that big, and they're braided. And anyway, you got to be careful when you're playing with these that you don't end up taking a chunk out of one or pulling the wire out of it or something. But anyway, I'll continue to play with it here. I'll need both ends to do that. And we'll come back when hopefully I have all four of these working like they should. Okay, so a few minutes later, we have this brush coming out to the full extension of the spring. You see the wire that goes in the side there, the little insulation on it there. Tip of my fingers coming right out to the end of the brush holder. And if I remove the brush, and I've had to do this a couple of times, so I'll just turn it, we can see on this side I actually took a very small file and carefully removed what I think might have been a little bit of solder on the side of that brush. Now this brush was obviously working at some point, and the solder was probably there all along, but now, anyway, that brush is working. This brush here is working, and there's a couple more down in here. There's one, where is it? That feels like that's a brush right there, you can't see it. There's a brush there and it's stuck in. There should be another brush down right here, also in the dark, and it's stuck in, so I'm going to have to work at those. We'll work at those, and when those two are free, we'll come back and I'll tell you they're free. We'll go from there. Okay, the camera focuses here. Okay, so here's the brush that we started with that was moving, so now it's moving still. This is the first brush we freed up. It's moving nicely. We have another brush down here, which, remember I said they were made of soft carbon and easily chip? Well, I made the mistake of trying to pull this out with a pair of needle nose pliers and I broke the corners off of it. But I think it will still work, and now it's moving nice and easily. And down here we have brush number 4, and it's moving nice and free. Now, what I had to do basically was, well, I pushed this brush in, of course, then it's stuck. So then I had to use a very small screwdriver and get in and gently poke underneath where the wire was and pull the brush out till I could get a hold of it with my fingers and pull it out and clean it the best I could with my fingers. And I sprayed some penetrating oil in around these and worked them. I actually had to take my very small file, to a couple of the brushes and just give them a gentle rub to make them a little more of a loose fit in the holder, and they all move now. Problem is that I've used penetrating oil in here, and we don't want oil in around these brushes because oil attracts dust and dust will cause them to stick again. So what I'm going to do is take a product commonly sold as brake clean or brake cleaner or parts cleaner. It's an alcohol similar, I guess, to rubbing alcohol. I'm going to spray it on here and blow it out with compressed air, and it doesn't, this brake clean is used for cleaning brake rotors and brake drums, and it does not leave an oily residue. So when it's dry and gone, there should be nothing really to hold the dust to make these stick again, at least for a while. So I'm going to just spray these with brake clean now to get the oil off of them. Brake clean, compressed air, brake clean, compressed air a couple of times just to make sure, and then we'll, I guess, have to clean up the rotor and get it ready to go back on. And while I'm here, I can't turn this by hand. Something we have to watch when we're in here, taking the rotor off. Let's turn this with the nut and see if we can find the elusive Woodruff key. There it is. See, I'll just get something to point with here. Down here, this is the Woodruff key. It's a little half moon shaped key that keeps the rotor from spinning on the crankshaft. We have to make sure that stays in there. We don't want it to fall out. It's probably stuck in there, so I'm taking the nut back off here. It's probably stuck in there pretty good. If it's a loose fit in there, what can happen is as you push the the rotor on, if you haven't got it lined up right, the rotor pushes the woodruff key out of the slot and against the seal, and then you tighten the rotor on and you turn it and it makes a big mess in here. So you want to make sure that that woodruff key is in place, is stuck in place, and it stays in place while you assemble the rotor. Anyway, we're going to clean this of the oil that's here and then clean the rotor up. So here's our rotor with the rust stain on it from where it was sitting in the water in the cover. So I'm going to take some of this rust off of here, just with some coarse sandpaper, and clean a bit of this off, especially this part here where the mark is, because that is inside the cover. That's probably where possibly where one of the rubbing noises is coming from, excuse me. So we're going to clean that rust off of there a bit. I'm going to take some coarse sandpaper and clean in here these sections all here, from here, pointing device needed here. So from here to here is steel, and you can see there's a fair bit of rust there. I'm going to just take a piece of coarse sandpaper and rub it around in there until I start to see signs of shiny metal, any steel, and then I'm going to take some finer sandpaper while I'm here and just clean the commutator surface, these wedge-shaped pieces from here to here. The brushes contact, I think, from, well, looks like from here to here. I'm going to clean up from there to there, just give them a little rub to make them look a little more like copper. And I'm going to give this center of the hub here a little touch with sandpaper too to clean the rust off, but we'll do that and come back. Actually, we'll do that. I'll have to, of course, using the sandpaper is going to make a lot of dust, so I'm going to try to keep the dust cleaned up as I go, because we don't want any dust from here ending back up in the brushes and making them stick again. So we'll clean this up and come back. After a few minutes, with 80 grit sandpaper on the rust and 400 grit sandpaper on the commutator surface, we have a slightly less rusty rotor here. So I cleaned up this area here a little bit, took some of the rust off of there, off of it there. There's still a bit in along here. I'll maybe just take a wire brush to that, trying not to take the covering off the wires here as I do it. I'll just take a wire brush gently to that in a few minutes and see if I can remove any of the loose rust there. And I cleaned I call the pole pieces here, and they're not all perfectly clean, but I spent a few minutes with the 80 grit sandpaper in here, again trying not to take the covering off of these wires. And then after I cleaned as much rust as I figured I was going to off of the face of these pole pieces, I took a very small screwdriver and just pulled it through the groove between them, just to pull any stuff that was stuck in there out, and there's probably still stuff in there, but I think it's going to stay. And then I took some 80 grit sandpaper and cleaned the commutator surface up a bit so it's shinier than it was. It's not perfectly shiny, but the more I use the sandpaper on it to shine it up, the less material there is there. So while I was in here, I gave the hub here a little bit of a clean with the sandpaper too. So I'm just going to go give this a brush with the wire brush just by hand, and then I'm going to set this back on the crankshaft and put the nut on it. Now, before I do that, since this is out where we can see it, there's the red mark I made on the rotor, and just beside it, see there's a punch mark just ahead of my finger there. So that punch mark, which is right there, Again, I need a pointing device here. My finger's just a little too coarse. Okay, sorry. There's the punch mark. Right there. A little square punch mark. Right in the edge of the recess for the ignition cam. So that punch mark fits in this little cutout in the cam. So we have to make sure we put the cam back on in that position, or else the ignition system will be not timed correctly, so the spark won't happen at the correct time. And before we put this cam back on, I'm just going to give it a little rub with the very fine sandpaper just to clean it up a little bit. But we'll put the rotor on first after we take these we'll take those screws out of it before we put it on. Anyway, I'm going to set it back on, making sure that the keyway here, the slot for the key, is more or less lined up with the Woodruff key, and then I'll slide it on, wiggle it to make sure it's on the key, and then we'll put the nut on, tighten it as tight as we can with the strap wrench holding the rotor and a socket, and then we'll hook the battery up. That's right, I did have the battery disconnected while I was working in here around this electrical stuff. So we'll hook the battery back up, turn the key, and hopefully we'll hear this engine crank over. Okay, so I can't actually show you me tightening this up, but I can show you the tools I used and how they look in place. There's the socket on the ratchet, and there is the strap wrench. Now I've tightened this as tight as I can. I don't have the spec in front of me, but this is essentially the flywheel on this engine, so it should be tight. So I'm just going to double check after I put the camera down that it's as tight as I can get it with this setup, and then we'll connect the battery and I'll come back as we turn the key and see what happens. Okay, so I double checked that the rotor was as tight as I could get it with the strap wrench and the socket, and now we have the key in the on position. We've got a light on our generator light, so we've got power. So the engine is cranking over. Let's see if it'll crank over in reverse. No, we have an issue here.